Protein is now at Starbucks, and it's never tasted so good. You can add protein cold foam to your favorite drink or try one of our new protein lattes or matcha. Try it today at Starbucks.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
It's a bit Lee Johnson. I'm in love with the idea of Lee Johnson.
I was going to say you're recording.
It's a great year.
Okay, we're ready.
Is my microphone high up enough? Feels like it's sort of a bit further down, but I don't want to touch it in case I break it. I will find a way.
Speak louder.
Oh, yeah.
It's Stuart Cosgrove approach.
Hello,
no.
To
be fair, it has to speak up. You got a lot True. Jonathan Sutherland's been looking at some funny websites. Back when only an excuse was good. Problem is, the only thing I've got stuck in my head when he's talking about this shows how old it is, the terrorist attack at Glasgow Airport. He's talking about, he did that thing we had, like the rhyming songs, like the burning jeep, the Gaza beep, the molested sheep. It's like, why is that all I can remember?
The water tarts. The three tarts. The teddy bears, the Avalon bears, the wet flares, the truth or dares.
That's what made you think, did he ever actually do that? Because like, if he didn't,
oh my god.
Okay.
So we are going to talk about Barlaser, we're just not leading on it. Lead with AGM stuff.
I think stadium naming rights and then other AGM stuff. Looking forward to what you've got to say because I've absolutely no idea. And then Barlaser at the end.
10 minutes per topic, cool.
Please.
So stadium rights, AGM, Barlaser,
done.
Talk about Killy. You want 10 minutes on the stadium rights?
You don't know what I've got to say.
I'm hoping you've got 9 minutes.
Right, to talk very, very slowly.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello and welcome back to the Dunbar End podcast here on the Hibs Observer with me, Jack Harris, and of course I'm joined as ever by Hibs Observer editor Patrick McPartlin. A lot to discuss today. It's been a quiet week on the Hibs competitive front with the international window, but there is a big fixture against Kilmarnock coming up on Saturday. Also got lots to discuss from the Hibs AGM and talks with the executives at Hibs to discuss. Patrick, we'll start there. I think you've got some quotes about the stadium naming rights. Talk to me about. I don't know what to say.
Go from. Let's start there. Patrick, you've got some quotes.
Yeah. I don't think you need to say that. Just go straight in. Just say stadium naming rights. Dan Barlaser has said categorically won't happen. What's your take? Something like that. I don't think we need to say you've got quotes because it makes it sound like a wave a bit of paper around, which I'm definitely not doing.
One of the just don't look at this camera. Just start on the conversation.
Sure.
Just say something along the lines of, so one of the key talking points was that of stadium naming rights.
Yeah.
Such
Cool.
Said that categorically won't happen.
Patrick, we'll start there. One of the main talking points from the AGM and those surrounding conversations were the stadium naming rights. Got a quote from Dan Barlaser saying that our principal goal is to do things that... that's not the one. For fuck's sake, Jack. I'm nervous, that's why.
You make him nervous.
I'm scared, Blair. I'm scared.
I don't think you need to worry about the exact quote because like the piece is coming out at 6. We're putting this out at 7. So I think if you just say, one of the big talking points is stadium naming rights. Chief Executive Dan Barlaser has said it's categorically not happening. What's your take on it then? Just have a quick look. Yeah, and I could just talk around that, just say, talking about making the fans proud, what it means, blah, blah, blah. And just, yeah. So you don't need to do the quote, just say Dan Barlaser said categorically not happening. What's your take? Something like that.
We'll start there. One of the big talking points coming out of the AGM and those conversations were around the stadium naming rights at Easter Road. Chief Executive Dan Barlaser saying categorically that changing the name for any sort of financial gain was categorically not in the plans, categorically to get it in 3 times. Patrick, what were your thoughts around that?
I think it's been probably a topic of discussion for a number of years now, has been the fact that Easter Road could have naming rights, the same with the training centre, that you can stick a sponsor in front of that and presumably make X number of £1 million a year. And, around the wider conversations with how Hibs can increase the revenue streams, then you'd imagine it is a topic that's been discussed, in the boardroom at Easter Road and probably further afield. And I think it's one of those kind of issues that, you would have to get it right if you were going to do it. I think, we've seen several clubs, not just in Scotland, but further afield in the UK and, the sort of wider global football sphere that, naming rights have been kind of slapped onto stadiums. Fans maybe haven't been completely happy with it for whatever reason. So I think, if you were going down that road, there is a lot to consider. I think you would have to get, the fans involved. Dan Barlaser talking about, the importance of the fans forum for making big decisions that affect the club. But I think to categorically state it's not happening, I mean, you would imagine they've got other routes to go down when it comes to increasing revenue streams. I think it's probably quite nice that, the club doesn't feel compelled to go down this route. It'd be very easy, presumably, to get a kind of lump sum just to, stick a name in front of it, the something stadium at Easter Road or something Easter Road Stadium. But I suppose it's one of those topics where, if you think about how many stadiums in the Scottish Premiership, for example, have naming deals, and we just call them what we've always called them. I still call Livingston Stadium Amundvale from time to time. I still call it the Tony Macaroni. I still call it whatever it was called a couple of seasons back. And it's in fact called the home of the Set Fair Arena.
Yeah, the only one that ever caught on for me was the Spaghetti Had.
Well, there you go. And I think it's the same with, there are lots of stadiums that have naming rights deals that, nobody really uses them apart from if it's in, sort of official communication. And I think it's something that I think a lot of people probably wouldn't mind as much if it happened, because they'd still call it Easter Road. It would still be Easter Road to them. The Leeds San Siro, you name it. So it's an interesting decision by Hibs to categorically rule it out. Obviously, there's, I don't think they've ruled out doing a deal with the training centre, and I think that probably makes more sense. There's less kind of sentiment attached to that. Yeah. I think when you consider how long the Hibs Stadium has been called Easter Road, and it's just a name that is kind of synonymous with the club, and it sort of puts it in the Leith area, that sort of thing. So it's an interesting decision. I think it's probably the right one, just to avoid going down the sort of soulless corporate, not listening to our fans route that quite a few clubs have done. But it will be interesting to see what kind of other routes Hibs do go down to try and increase those revenue streams. Whether we'll see a kind of headline sponsor for the training centre, which obviously is getting an upgrade over the next sort of like year or 2 years, that sort of thing. So that's one to keep an eye on. But I think the majority of people will probably be happy that Easter Road is going to stay Easter Road and not turn into a sort of long and difficult to remember titled football stadium.
I think so. And I mean, you look at you mentioned the history of calling it Easter Road and that sort of that connection with the area. I think that's something that came out for me was just talking to the executives, sort of seeing what you'd written as well. You really get the sense that they care about Leith and the community. That's sort of at the forefront of a lot of plans, as is exactly as you said, the fan forums, making sure that supporters feel like their voices are heard. Mm-hmm. It would feel, I mean, it's an interest. There are lots of different ways that you can go about getting revenue, but I think just in terms of how important it is to the community in Leith and in Edinburgh too. It would feel strange, and I think you're absolutely right to say that supporters would just call it as they know it. I mean, that's been the case in Scotland, in the UK, and around Europe and the world as well. That once you get that sort of sentimentality, you get that attachment, then you do just come up with your own names. Maybe Spaghetti Head wasn't the best, but
well, it's the fact that I think if you think of the number of songs that are kind of synonymous with the club. So Hibs Heroes by Colin Chisholm. You've got the It's a Grand Old Team to Play For by Hector Nicholl. They mention Easter Road, so it's you can't suddenly change the lyrics to suit that. You can't change what you've called the club for years, what it's been known as for for decades throughout history, and especially not in the 150th anniversary year as well. I think that probably would have been a bit of a misstep to come out and say we're going to give our stadium a really kind of horrible corporate sounding name just to kind of shoehorn a sponsor in there. But
I was trying to think of how the Colin Chisholm song would go. When I was 5, my daddy took me down to the Coca-Cola Easter Road.
Exactly, yes.
It doesn't have the same ring, does it?
Doesn't have the same ring, doesn't scan properly. And I think one of the other things that they talk about at Hibs is trying to improve the club's standing on a global scale, trying to get the story. I think Dan Burnett called it the magic of Hibernian out there. And I think if you're doing that, if you're able to do that with a stadium that has the same name that it's had for the past 100 odd years, it makes it a lot easier. It makes it more sort of straightforward to sell the kind of sentimental story, the history, the Irish roots and everything. If you're able to say, look, it's still called same as it's always been called since its sort of first appearance in the 1890s, then I think that's that probably helps in terms of being able to to sell this magic of Hibs, and to be able to say, here's our stadium, this is where we play, this is, for some people, this is their church, this is their happy place, whatever you want to call it. And I think just being able to to be in the 150th anniversary year and still be calling the stadium what it's been called for the best part of well over a century now, then I think that will mean a lot to a lot of people for for the clubs being in their history, being in their family, their ancestry, you name it. So I think it's good that Hibs are considering these other revenue options, that they're looking at ways of bringing in more money, but not just kind of taking a quick buck and just saying, that sounds like a good deal, we'll do that.
Yeah, because there were a lot of different ways that were proposed. I mean, obviously we've spoken about the Fanatics deal, obviously moving towards a new setup. I think it was Barnett that talked about the sort of expiry of legacy contracts as well, and trying to do things differently, I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but it was sort of trying to maximize what you get off the pitch, as well as all the conversations of what happens on the pitch.
Yeah, and also having deals that suit the club now, because deals that were struck maybe 3-4 years ago, long-term deals that at the time might have been good from a financial point of view because you're getting a sort of large amount up front, and obviously with the accounts and the balance books, that probably looks quite good. But I think the direction Hibs want to go in this kind of global approach, you want to be sort of working with partners who reflects what the club is about and where you want to take the club, and this sort of standing of where it is in the community, where it is in the Leith community, where it is in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and then further afield. And I think if you're tied into these sort of long contracts, then your hands are tied, and you don't really have anywhere to go with that. And I think that somebody like Dan Burnett coming in with 6 years experience at Leicester as their commercial director, he'll have ideas of how he wants to do things. He has a lot of experience of doing things at Premier League level, and presumably European competition level as well. So, to have that kind of fresh take on it, someone who, has maybe sort of taken out these sorts of deals at a higher level in a footballing sense, and then coming into Hibs and saying, well, how can we apply that to this scenario, to this club? Where can we, take the club with a view to, not only getting kind of sort of bigger name sponsors in, but getting more money on board, and just getting the Hibs name out there and pushing it further afield to audiences who might not previously have been aware of it.
Yeah, and sort of making sure that what happens is sustainable as well. I think that was one of the big lines that came up.
One of the buzzwords, yeah.
It's been spoken about a lot. That Dan Barnett said, the way I think the financial side is just not sustainable at the minute. Obviously, the losses being less. I think you reported a while ago. Which is fantastic, and sort of moving towards more sustainability, but the number is still quite bold and red.
It's one of those where you look at the accounts, and as a standalone, there's maybe a sharp intake of breath, but certainly compared to last year's accounts, you think, well, there has been an improvement. It's maybe fairly small in the grand scheme of things, but you consider where the club was and how kind of alarming last year's accounts were, to then see improvements, no matter how small or gradual this year, is a suggestion that the club is probably going in the right direction, and will continue to do so. And as we were saying there, with the kind of dealing with these legacy contracts that maybe don't sort of suit where the club needs to be at this moment in time, and just finding out ways of maximizing revenue, so like taking retail in house, and just all the options that you can have with that, what you can do with it, and just getting the merchandise out there further afield, making it easy to get hold of things like that. That's just one example, that can help. But it does feel that, I think it does feel that the club is heading in the right direction. The losses still are eye-watering, I would say, and it's concerning. And when you look at how many clubs have kind of struggled financially, and it's Hibs obviously want to be getting back to a place where the club is sustainable, where the losses aren't quite so alarming. And it is baby steps at the moment, but it does seem to be heading in the right direction. And obviously the next set of accounts, you'll have the revenue from European football, you'll have the revenue from Kieran Bowie's transfer to Hellas Verona, and that obviously will help the next year's accounts look even better. And I think it's about kind of taking steps to it's doing it manageably. It's not a case of trying to do everything all at once. It's sort of incrementally, I think.
Yeah, it's a gradual process.
It is, and I think you can see that with the most recent set of accounts that things are heading in the right direction, but still probably not quite out of the woods just yet.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I wanted to ask you, just coming out of the AGM and those talks, were this idea of multi-club ownership, because I think this was another big buzzword of what the group were talking about, and sort of wanted to address. Obviously, Hibs having the deal with the Black Knights, which came to an amicable conclusion. But you've seen all of these issues. I think it was Crystal Palace. The other one that came to mind was Girona, when they finished quite strongly in La Liga. I think got to the Champions League, and then there were all the logistics of making sure they were able to play there because of their involvement with the City Football Group. What was your takeaway from this idea of Hibs? Because I don't think they quashed the idea that Hibs could take on external investment, but it would need to be sort of fitting with what they were trying to do, and prioritize making sure that it wouldn't come in the way of getting into European competition. Yeah,
I mean, that was the kind of key takeaway from me from what the chief executive was saying, was that multi-club ownership and getting involved in a kind of multi-club network does seem to be off the table, but external investment isn't. We know there's been these talks with the Michelin owner Anders Holt-Poulsen, and that's it's been talked about as like an advisory status, that kind of something's happening here, but nothing to get excited about. It sort of seems very kind of managing sort of excitement levels and saying there's not going to be like a massive partnership or anything. But I think the fact that there are those talks, so there are there's obviously a relationship there between Ian Gordon and Poulsen, and it's exciting because of what Michelin have done in Europe, what they've done as a club, and everything that they're trying to do on and off the field. It's good to have that kind of that knowledge, those experiences to kind of draw on. I think when you look at the European aspect, you look at the Crystal Palace case was one that was mentioned, and for a club like Hibs, who have ambitions of finishing in the European places every year, to be part of a multi-club network and not really knowing whether you might get bumped down to the next European competition if you're in the Europa League or higher, or getting punted out of European competition altogether, obviously kind of flies in the face of what Hibs want to be doing. It's and you would have to imagine that if Hibs were in a multi-club group, then there would be this sort of, much as we saw with the Black Knights, that there is a pecking order, there is a kind of hierarchical nature to it, where maybe not necessarily obviously, but you are kind of a feeder club for the bigger fish at the top of the network. And I think Hibs are quite keen to avoid being in that situation. That was one of the reasons why the involvement with the Black Knights came to an end, because they didn't see the club, or they didn't want the club to be a feeder club for Bournemouth. They didn't want to see them as being a kind of minority partner in a bigger sort of club stable. And I think that's it's good that, again, it goes back to what we were saying about the stadium naming rights, that Hibs obviously don't want this to kind of sign the soul of the club away to big bucks, basically. I think the prospect for investment is obviously there. I think Hibs are an attractive club. for a lot of people. And we were told there has been a lot of inbound interest. I think that was the quote used, the phrase used, inbound interest, from parties who maybe want to get involved in a similar way to the Black Knights, or potentially even on a larger scale. And I think the Gordons have always kind of reiterated their desire to sort of keep leading the club, to continue Ron Gordon's legacy. So I think you've got a family who care deeply about the club and its standing in the community, and want to grow the club on and off the pitch. You obviously don't want to become part of something where that kind of gets thrown to the side of the road and isn't deemed important. And I think that's reassuring, I think, for a lot of fans, a lot of supporters, that is the kind of feeling in-house. And if you're then open to investment opportunities in other directions, I don't know whether that would be front of shirt sponsorship, whether it would be, again, like we talked about, whether that could be, not stadium naming rights, but training centre naming rights, getting some sort of sponsorship deal there, or really just having partnerships that the club is benefiting from a lot more than they have in previous years. That's all ways of sort of helping to grow the club financially, helping to grow the club on the pitch and off it as well, without becoming part of some kind of larger, kind of soulless multi-club group. And it doesn't have the problem of, if we finish in the European places, are we going to get to play in that European competition, or are we going to be holding our breath? Are we going to be, are we going to get kind of eliminated? Not eliminated. What's the word? Are we going to get sort of disqualified, banned from playing because we're part of this group? So not to have that concern is obviously a positive, and I think to still be open to some form of external investment shows that they haven't completely closed the door on having other partners involved, but I suppose just being a bit more careful about what that looks like and what sort of involvement they have. And
it's about making sure it's right for the club.
Exactly.
Like everything else we've said so far, it's making sure not to just jump at the money, I guess, but to make sure that you're doing things with due diligence, and making sure you're bringing on people, I think you said, interested in Hibs as an entity, and Hibs as a story, and Hibs as a community, and making sure that whatever investment comes reflects that in the decisions that they make. Well, we'll go from investment into Hibs to investment that Hibs may be making. Obviously, yesterday reported that Hibs are interested in extending the stay of Dan Barlaser at Easter Road. I think he's out of contract on the 30th of June, and his Middlesbrough contract expires. So obviously, there's a chance to go for him as a free agent. We've seen some pretty good things. There's been a slightly mixed reaction to the news. I think a lot of people would welcome the signing, but some, maybe perhaps more skeptical, think there might be a little bit more need to be seen from Barlaser. But I think so far he's had a pretty positive impact on Hibs. Obviously 28 league appearances so far, so it's become a very important player in that midfield. But something you think good idea, bad idea? Put you on the spot.
I think I can see why it makes sense. It makes sense from the point of view of continuity. It makes sense from the point of view of having a player in the squad who has clearly contributed off the pitch as well as on it, having that kind of right character that the club is sort of values very highly. And I think somebody who's played the number of games that he has at a championship level, if you have the option to at least try and sort of make a case for him staying at the club, then that's obviously got to be a good thing. I think he's got quite a young family, so if they're set, I mean, I'm not sure if they're up here, but if it's about having them settled and not moving them around too much, then the idea of staying in the same place for a little bit longer might appeal. I think there probably will be a lot of interest in Barlaser just because of his status. He's obviously spent quite a number of years playing in the Championship, playing for big clubs. He doesn't have a future at Middlesbrough. They've obviously changed manager since he came up the road, but he's out of contract, and I don't think he's somebody who they really see as being part of their sort of forward plan. So he will have a decision to make in the summer. I think Hibs can make a sort of strong case for saying you've played a number of games. You know the club. You've come in sort of not having really had much of a pre-season, got up to fitness, and we have seen games where he's been very effective. We've seen games where he's maybe struggled to have the same sort of impact. But if we look at the Motherwell game, in which he played a slightly different role, it's not entirely out with the realms of possibility that he can kind of take his game to a new level. And having almost had a season, if you like, to get used to Scottish football, knows what's expected and knows how the games differ when you're playing teams who are going to press you from the start, who are going to not give you a moment's peace to the ones who are going to sit back and just let you have the bulk of possession. So I think, David Gray likes to talk about having, as much business done as possible, as early as possible in the transfer windows. We know it never works like that. He knows it never works like that. But I think one of the big things about, going from his first season in charge to the second was just how many players did stay. Obviously, some of them left halfway through this season. I was just thinking, Dylan Levitt, Junior Hoylett, but having a sort of core group and keeping them, instead of having to sort of meet 11 or 12 signings every summer, to have that continuity, to have that kind of familiarity when it comes to pre-season as well. When you're sort of coming in, people just pick up where they left off. I think that's a good thing. We know Hibs are going to need midfielders. Kai Andrews obviously is on loan at the moment. Dylan Levitt left in January. There's potentially going to be interest in the likes of Josh Mulligan, Miguel Chaiwa. So it could be a case of trying to bring in more bodies in midfield in the summer. And if you've got somebody who's already in the building, obviously makes sense to look at that. I'd imagine it'd be similar with Jacob McIntyre, who's doing quite well out on loan for Arbroath. He's at a stage now where he needs to be playing first team football. He's had a loan to a championship club. He's performing well. He's somebody who you would imagine, if he's not kind of, obviously these conversations might happen towards the end of the season, they might have already happened, but he's somebody who you would think should be looking at pushing for a first team sort of place at Hibs from the summer onwards, just because of his age, his experience, his ceiling, that sort of thing. I know he's had injuries, but somebody else who would be looking at staking a claim for involvement in the first team. And again, it's one less thing to worry about when it comes to recruitment, if you can bump somebody up in-house. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a similar case with Barlaser as well. So I think my main thing, we said this before, I think in other pods, that he needs to do more in the games where Hibs don't have as much time on the ball, where he doesn't have as much time to pick a pass. We saw sort of glimpses of that against Motherwell. He had a sort of slightly different role, more aggressive, more kind of forward thinking. Yeah. I think, see more of that. And again, the sort of post-split fixtures will be very instructional as to where he's at as a player, if he's sort of recognised that he does need to play a different way against certain teams. That'll probably be, a good kind of barometer of where he's at, and if he can come in as, somebody who can, keep starting games for Hibs. Because I suspect, you look at, just trying to think, if everybody's fit, if you've got a midfield of kind of Mulligan, McGrath, Barlaser, that's not a bad trio.
It's not a bad trio at all.
If you've got Miguel Chaiwa in there as well, also good. Jacob McIntyre pushing up, Joe Newell's still under contract. Yeah. There's midfield options there, and I think that if you're looking at Barlaser's contribution to Hibs, it's grown since he came in the door. He's been more involved. He's been more kind of influential. It's just about that little bit extra when it's against arguably sort of top four teams, which is where Hibs want to be in the league, against the Celtics, the Rangers, the Hearts. It's just, I suppose, having a bit more dig in those games, a bit more aggression, a bit more kind of forward thinking, just doing more to kind of influence the game and to change up slightly what he's doing. But I think from a point of view of having somebody in the squad who's already in the building, who knows the way you want to play, knows the league, it solves an awful lot of problems when it comes to recruitment and not knowing if somebody's going to settle. So on that basis, it makes a lot of sense. I think there is a lot to like about this as a potential deal. As you say, quite a few fans maybe not quite as sold on it as others, but I think we probably have seen, broadly speaking, what he can bring to the side, and it's just a case of taking his game to the next level. Against those sort of top four sides. And I think he's probably got the capacity to do that. He's a good age. He's obviously come up against similar clubs in the Championship. He's had time to experience Scottish football, and he knows what's expected. And
because that Fir Park game, it wasn't Motherwell at their best, but it's under that pressure. It's sort of making sure. I think when I looked at his performance for a piece maybe last week, it's looking at where he sort of positions himself to make those passes. And I think what you see is a player who's sort of trying to push up more, trying to get more involved towards the front. If that, like you say, the split's a good litmus test for that. Mm-hmm. Is that something that Barlaser can continue to do in those games? Another chance to do it against Motherwell, who no doubt at that stage of the season will probably perform better than they did. I mean, obviously playing at Easter Road is going to be a different experience for them, different experience for Hibs as well. Then you've got the likes of Falkirk, where I think I'm trying to recall the game. I don't remember him really setting the world on fire. I don't think anybody in a Hibs shirt set the world on fire against Falkirk that last time in that 4-1 defeat. But then obviously Celtic, Rangers and Hearts as well, all three teams fighting for the title, who will be looking to put pressure on a player like Barlaser and sort of try to dominate in the midfield. It'll be interesting to see whether you get the Barlaser who's sometimes been a little bit more quiet and just try to be a bit composed, play his game, or if you get the Barlaser that's got that sort of fire in his eyes and sort of looking to push forward. Before the split, though, obviously 2 more games to go, the second of which is Aberdeen at Pittodrie. But first is Kilmarnock at Easter Road this weekend. Neil McCann has come in. I say Neil McCann has come in. I mean, he's been in for a while. But the results haven't been fantastic. But I think, like we've said a couple of times, that the football has been improved. And they're obviously involved in that relegation battle, but it's a team that looks better on the pitch. And if we think back to right towards the start of the season, was it the second game of the season when Kilmarnock visited Easter Road? Mm-hmm. That 2-2 draw. I mean, obviously, you know that they can pose threats.
Yeah, I think, as you say, Neil McCann's come in. He's done a good job of not just kind of steadying the ship, but kind of taking them a little bit higher than where they'd been previously. I think there were times when, they did look a little bit like a lost cause, and they certainly don't look like that now. And as you rightly point out, they're in the sort of battle at the wrong end of the table as far as they're concerned, and they want to, maintain their status in the top flight, and that does make it an additional challenge for Hibs. But again, it's one that they kind of have to ignore and just sort of focus on getting 3 points. And we've talked before about the selection issues that David Gray's maybe going to have in terms of who starts up front, who gets the sort of nod in midfield, whether he sort of sticks with it, whether he tries to mix it up a wee bit, because obviously the last 2 games 0-0 draws, very different types of 0-0 draws. One at home where Hibs dominated against the bottom club and just couldn't find a way to goal, and then one that, again, we've said previously, a 0-0 draw at Motherwell, out of context, not a bad result against a team that's doing well, but in the sort of wider context of Hibs season, one where they might have, or will have wanted to have picked up 3 points as they try to overhaul Motherwell in that race for Europe. So, Kilmarnock is another test. It's one where it's, I don't want to refer to every game as a potential banana skin, even though they probably are.
We have said that a lot.
We have said that a lot, but it does need to be a game where Hibs need to get 3 points. Not just for their own kind of European hopes, but just to kind of get out of that rut of kind of, I think it was 3 draws on the bounce. Again, you can look at it all manner of different ways. You can say they've only lost 1 in, I think it's 8 matches, but they've not sort of 1 in 5, that kind of thing as well. So not scored in 2. So it's sort of food for thought for David Gray, how he sort of approaches that game, how he mixes it up. And I think it's always interesting going into games off the back of an international break, because you never know really what sort of condition the players are going to be in. If you look at Martin Boyle and Andy Schutel travelling back from Australia, Rocky Bashiri coming back from wherever, Mexico, I think they were playing in. Obviously not quite as long haul as Australia back to Scotland, but long enough. And players who've maybe been carrying injuries as well. So it'll be, I think, an interesting couple of days in the training ground for David Gray, trying to ascertain where his players are, who's fit, who's not, who might be able to give him 45 minutes, who can only give him sort of 20 off the bench. But regardless, it needs to be 3 points. So that's a non-negotiable now. Ideally, it needs to be 3 points in every game between now and the end of the season. But football is a fickle game. We know it doesn't work like that. But it is a good chance for Hibs to go back to Easter Road, to kind of put that run of draws behind them, to get back on the score sheet, that sort of thing. All the cliches. I could go on and on. I'm not going to, but just a really good opportunity for Hibs to kind of start the sort of final 7-game run strongly, positively, and to sort of exercise the ghosts of those 2 0-0 draws, because it's not often that we've seen Hibs sort of have back-to-back.
It's not often at all.
Back-to-back stalemates in the league. So yeah, it's a big game. They're all big games, but this one feels a little bit more important just because of what's happened before. And if Hibs can start the 7-game run positively, then if they can take the confidence from that, you get momentum.
Yeah, it's as much what's coming, because if you don't have that confidence when you're in front of goal, I think it's probably fair to say. I mean, at Fir Park, opportunities were relatively few and far between. Good goal scoring opportunities. That wasn't the case at Livingston. I think, well, not at Livingston, sorry, when Hibs had Livingston at Easter Road, that was a case of just not finding that little clinical edge. And you have to look at Kilmarnock recently. I think, I want to say it was them that had that 5-1 defeat at the Falkirk Stadium. I'm pretty sure it was them. Do apologise if it wasn't. But you're looking at a team on the road where the defensive record hasn't been fantastic. It does present a good opportunity for the Hibs forwards, or like Warren O'Hara would say, everybody to contribute to Hibs attacks. But we've said the potential banana skin now, so who knows? Maybe it's us. Maybe we're the problem. Maybe we're the curse.
I don't know. I think when it comes to Hibs, people have sort of feelings about these sorts of games. I mean, speaking to a lot of people before the Livingston game, there were people saying, this is one where I can see Hibs slipping up, and they did. Maybe that's pessimism, maybe it's realism, who knows? But I think
that was caveated by then Hibs would go and win at Fir Park. So
it was.
It was the worst of both worlds.
Terrible for predictions. But I think if there's one thing we've learned about this David Gray side over the last almost 2 seasons, it's that it's very rare for them to go sort of more than sort of 2 games without things kind of really clicking. And
yeah,
you could even argue against Livingston, things did click for most of the game. It was just in front of goal, which has been a kind of an ongoing problem for Hibs this season. I wrote that piece early this week, looking at Hibs in an attacking sense and a defensive sense, and there's been improvements at both ends of the park based on last season, but still the same issues remain, which is conceding late goals, late sort of decisive goals in some cases, and not really having that clinical edge up front. So it has felt a wee bit like there has been some progress, but then there has been a little bit of standing still, which has maybe contributed to the season feeling a little bit underwhelming, as well as all the other factors. But I think this is a chance for Hibs to, they'll have had time on the training ground. It's a chance for them to go back, get back into action, and I suppose kind of change the narrative a little bit, because at the moment it's been against Dundee. Obviously, it was they came back, they did well to come back, and then they couldn't hold on to the lead. Against Livingston, it was battered them for 90 minutes but couldn't find the goal, and against Motherwell, it was did well to stop them from playing but didn't do an awful lot to take advantage of the situation. So I think the mood probably does feel a little bit low at the moment. This would be a good time for Hibs to get a sort of fairly comprehensive or convincing victory, and like I said, set themselves up for the remaining games and just go into it with some sort of momentum and with a bit more interest. The kind of club. The club has sort of talked about, chasing that European spot, chasing the team in front of them, and getting 3 points against Kilmarnock could be a great place to start, and probably would get some of the fans back on side who are maybe feeling a little bit like the season's already over, that they are going to have to rely on Celtic winning the cup and finishing in the top 2 to have any hope of getting into Europe. Saturday's a great place for Hibs to change that narrative.
It's as good a place to start as any, especially with the 2 games that Motherwell have coming up, knowing that a direct rival for that European place has a difficult run before the split, and then you obviously have the opportunity to take points off of them at your home stadium. It's as good an opportunity as ever, and I doubt, even though the mood will be low, the players will need any reminder of that at all. But we will see what happens. We'll obviously see you all, figuratively speaking, but probably literally as well, as we gaze out into the stands at Easter Road for the game against Kilmarnock on Saturday. Do make sure you're tuned into all of our social media channels on Twitter, on Facebook. I've started posting on Blue Sky, and I'll probably start posting on LinkedIn as well. So wherever you get your Hibs news, we will be right there with you. And do subscribe to YouTube as well to stay tuned for our post-match reaction on Saturday. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you very soon.